New champions have paragraphs in their skill descriptions. How to say this? The number of words in a skill description does not really have any impact on like how problematic it's going to be. Some things need big descriptions because they do things pretty uniquely. And just because something has a big description does not mean it is necessarily overloaded or does too many things. Some teams just need to be described, especially if they're different. A really easy example of this is Graves has a paragraph of skill descriptions for his passive. But Graves' passive could also be described as this. Graves has a shotgun, right? And so it's kind of a thing where it's like, just because a thing has a lot of rules and stuff going on does not by default mean is it a problem, or it is overloaded, or it is doing too much. Just some things need to be described. Garen Z on the wiki has like 4 paragraphs. Yeah, Garen Z is actually, in terms of how it scales and stuff, very complex. It has a lot going on. And so I don't think like tool tipping is an effective way to describe why champions are problematic. Right? Like if you feel a character is overloaded, that's like really reasonable. Like I think that's there are definitely characters that end up being overloaded that that's a real thing, right? But I don't think the effective way to argue that a character is overloaded is tool tipping them, which basically means just running through their stuff and saying, here's a paragraph, here's a paragraph, here's a paragraph, therefore this proves this character is doing too much. One of the characters that's easiest to tooltip actually is Old URGOT. Old URGOT had an insane amount of things going on, and the end result was a character who, in most situations, was fairly non-functional. So it's like, yeah, you can have a lot in your tooltips. That doesn't necessarily mean you're overloaded or overpowered or whatever. I think one thing to remember if you're like tooltipping characters, like here's this character that does 5,000 things, is one of the more important parts about those tooltips that you're reciting is the things they don't have. And so what I mean by that is like your character can do 5,000 things, but if there's one thing they don't do and that thing matters, then those 5,000 things might not matter. All right. Again, depends on the character. Obviously doing a lot of things could mean you're overloaded, but like I would argue there's a lot of characters who are like more overloaded just because of the things that like a really easy example of this is like one of the things we thought, like we talked about both when Kaisa and Lucian came out that ended up not being a thing, is it was both like, actually no, that's a bad example of what I'm talking about. What am I talking about? Yeah, what a character doesn't do. So like, as an example, you can say a lot of things that Garen does, and you know, Garen can be strong or powerful at some point, but Garen can't dash on you and doesn't go over walls. And that's like really important in terms of like his ability to like put impact and threat on the game. Now, obviously, we've had some metas where Garen's like pretty crazy, but like there's been many times in the past where despite how long his E tooltip is, the part of his E tooltip is not it dashes him, and that's a big deal. That's a shit example. Perhaps, given people's like current feelings on Garen, maybe Hwei is a good example. I would argue one thing that the team did really well with Hwei is we gave him 10 spells, and one of the spells we did not give Hwei was a dash. And so if you look at Hwei's tooltips, he's got a lot of tooltips, a lot going on that could make you feel like he's overpowered. But one of the things that keeps him in line is his tooltips do not have dash in them. And in Hwei's case, that matters. For some characters, it doesn't matter. For some characters, they don't need dashes. But in Hwei's case, like the lack of mobility is a very real limiter on the potential power he's allowed to have. He's able to do. Another thing to note about tooltip length, since we're on the subject, is I think there's a number of champions that have very small tooltips that potentially can be really problematic. And so it's really, again, it's not necessarily about length. An example of this for me has always been Old Tom KENCH. Old Tom KENCH didn't do a lot. But what he did do was so complete that it created like a fairly potent balance issue. Like Old Tom KENCH, the one thing he did do is he was like, I'm going to make it so this AD carry can't die, right? And then he had so many things in his kit that just made that a perfect pattern in a lot of ways. Like his E was like, okay, well, I have 2 health bars, so I'm going to eat the AD carry, but you can't actually kill me. And, you know, made him very tanky, and, you know, W he could just eat people whenever he wanted. And so, like, Tom KENCH was a character who genuinely lacked many things. But I think the hard part about Tom KENCH, the old one, is that despite lacking so many things, he was still, like, near perfect at the thing he wanted to do, which was, you know, eat his AD carry and make sure they had a very hard time dying. And then the other thing is actually a really important part of old Tahm Kench's like power was his second health bar, his E. One of the things is that another thing that goes on with BRAUM is that if BRAUM is so good at defending the AD carry that you can't reach the AD carry, you could potentially try to kill BRAUM. Like that is a reasonable thing you could try to do, is be like, okay, we're really strong, and BRAUM's good at defending the AD carry in this situation, but maybe we can kill BRAUM here. And Tahm Kench's E is like very much like, it's actually similar in some ways to like why YUUMI has historically been like difficult to balance, where it's like, one of the things is that if a character is making the AD carry very safe, like an enchanter or a BRAUM-like champion, right? One of the things you can do is potentially kill them instead. It's like YUUMI is like, well, that's not the case for me, and Tahm Kench had something very similar going on. And so maybe like a good way to summarize what I'm talking about is one of the ways I think about this in terms of character design is it is good for characters to have wants and needs. It is good that if a character for a character to have wants and needs. So if you consider a character and you consider its win condition, like, hey, I'm this character and this is how I win the game. It is good if that character somewhere in their kit says, despite the fact that this is my win condition, here's something that makes it harder for me to win the game. And my kit doesn't accommodate for it. So in the case of Tahm Kench, one of the things I think that was difficult for him is he had this very powerful offensive tool, which was his win condition, like keep the AD carry alive. And there wasn't really anything going on in his kit that was like, and this makes, and he didn't really have any asks in his kit that made like his life harder in that way to achieve his win condition. And so an example for Hwei of like how this works is Hwei, you know, has all these spells, all these things he can do at range. He's got a lot of optionality there. But he has this one ask that's pretty hard, which is like, how do I avoid dying to Zed? How do I avoid dying to assassins? If someone jumps on me, that's a big deal for what I'm trying to do. And he has some answers to that. It's like, stay safe, stay back. He's got a root, stuff like that. But like, he can't necessarily like dash away or keep himself super safe in the moment when like an assassin tries to come and like one-shot him. And that's like an important output, I think, of like his design is, you know, there's certain asks he has. Master Yi. Master Yi is a character who, when he gets ahead, can look pretty ridiculous, right? He does a lot of stuff. I shouldn't say a lot of stuff, but he has a lot of things he's very good at when he's ahead, right? Master Yi, you know, is very powerful when he's ahead. There's a lot of things he can do, a lot of things he can ignore, like slows as an example, right? But at the same time, he never really has an answer to what if the enemy team groups up and they CC me, right? Like he has that like specific thing about him that he has a very, very hard time dealing with. It's like, how do I deal with the enemy team like watching for me to engage and just stunning me, right? Doesn't mean he can't succeed in certain games. Like that usually like involves his teammates helping him out or whatever, but like that's a very real limiter for Master Yi. He has a question in his kit that he has a hard time answering. So I think that's like generally important when thinking about character design, especially for more versatile characters, is, you know, if your character does all these things, what are the things that it wants to do that it might have a hard time doing? What are the questions that it has to ask?